think we were in God's plan. I think we finished God's plan, right?
I think part of yeah, we were.
Alright, and Rubik's, come on. Just don't be muted all the time. We can talk. There's like a soundboard and stuff. Like,
Wait, there's a soundboard.
there's a soundboard, yeah. I
Wait,
figured people
what?
would like figure it out, but like, no. Evil
What's a
happens.
soundboard?
There's a soundboard. Discord lets you make soundboards, so I made one.
Oh, this
To make
thing?
religion out of this.
Yeah, that thing.
Oh yeah, I saw that yesterday. I just didn't think to click on it.
Do you think?
Like that sort of thing, right?
Exactly! Yeah, you just hit the nail on the head!
Okay, cool.
Is this? Wait, do you guys hear
You can
it?
make
or
religion
no?
out of this.
Yeah, it's a soundboard. It works. Everyone can hear it.
I don't.
You can't hear. Did you even like disable soundboards?
Nothing!
I-
You lose!
I, I,
Good day, sir!
it, wait, so if I
You
just
can make a religion out of this. You can make a religion. No, don't.
like no,
What?
no
It says
sounds.
in their book
No
that they are.
sounds.
I could write a book and say that this is.
Would it be-
Oh yeah, I guess you must have them. I think there's a way to disable them. Either you disabled it like per person. Like, can you hear like the default ones? Can you hear the ducks?
No,
Oh,
I can't. I think I
You
just have
can't?
it disabled.
wait, you can't?
Yeah, there's
Nope.
probably a setting for it. I don't know.
Oh, because we've been going crazy with it.
Yeah, I don't know. Are you sad horning him when he can't even hear the sad horn?
I'm sad horning you and you can't hear the sad horn. Wait, can you hear? Who can't hear? I'm confused.
can't.
Mr. Games cannot hear it.
Oh, that's sad. That's why he
Yeah.
was saying.
Yeah. Yeah, there's probably a setting for it. I'd be surprised if there wasn't. Like, yeah, I don't know. I'm not Discord tech support. You can figure it out. There's like probably like in voice and video. There's probably the
Oh, I have it
soundboard.
turned down.
Yeah. Okay. There you go. There you go. Cool.
There we go.
Let's do some testing.
Oh my God, you fucking idiot! Listen to me and answer the question I
Okay.
asked you.
Can you hear it?
Yeah.
Okay. Great.
You get nothing! Exactly! You lose! Yeah, you just
Okay.
hit the nail on the head!
Okay. Anyway, so now we got soundboards going and working. Okay. So then, Mr. Rubik's, have you pondered your previous question or disagreement that you could not put into words from last session?
I have not pondered it, no.
I completely forgot what it was, and so I hope you ponder it at some point.
I remember what it is, but I have not pondered it.
Okay, maybe ponder it, and then we can talk about it, and we can, conclude your disagreement, or we can make me conclude my disagreement. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know what's up with that
Wait.
one.
But God is unknowable. It says it's a catch-all in the
It is. This is the last catch-all, but then I have a mini section of catch-alls that aren't really.
Oh.
These are like the God exists. There's more. I elected not to talk about them. These are just the most egregiously dumb ones that I really hate. The other ones are like philosophical, like if someone pulls out a cosmological argument, that's different. If someone goes like, hey, everything came from something, so where did everything come from, unmoved mover, so on and so forth, that's not really a catch-all, it's an argument. These two are catch-alls, though. They're not arguments for God, really. Well, they are, but they're catch-alls like, hey, I can't XYZ, therefore God, and it's not really an XYZ, it's just I'm gonna pull some BS. Whereas with like a cosmological argument, there's like there's the logical argument, and I can prove why it doesn't work, you see. But these are just nonsense, which is why they're here. Okay. God is unknowable, the last technical catch-all related to his actions and not his existence. So we're almost done with the preface. We're on page 6, almost page 7. Okay, so let's start. It's only been like 10 minutes. Similarly to God's plan, when confronted with the logical consequences of something or a contradiction in God or how he acts, his definitions, whatever, this is actually like the most catch-all-y of all the catch-alls, kind of why it's last. Also, because it's a catch-all I didn't expect to have to write. Someone pulled this BS, and it's like, if you're gonna pull this, I'm like, this is so annoying. I'm going to put in a page worth of like reasons why this is not good. Okay, like half a page, but still. So, some examples of when this comes into play. Determinism and free will are contradictions. You don't know God. He could just make both. God's so loving but allows constant suffering. You don't know God. That's the best case, because reasons. Bible says something that contradicts all evidence and makes zero sense for God to do. The false record is incredibly consistent with various dating methods and not with the Bible. God could do it, and he's unknowable, so it doesn't need to make sense, and he could make the donkeys and snakes talk and then make him stop talking with no evidence that any of that happened, because reasons, you don't know God, he just did it. And so on and so forth. This is literally a catch-all for literally any single qualm that could ever be raised. You don't know God, therefore, you you don't get to talk about it. Hey, we got 4 people, very exciting. Cool. To continue, the second you make the hey, God is unknowable, therefore you can't talk, the person making the God is unknowable argument can't talk either. You're saying God's all loving. You don't know God. You don't know if he's all loving. God's all powerful. You don't know God. He doesn't have to be all powerful. How do you know that? And even the concept of God being unknowable, in and of itself, if he's unknowable, how do you know he's unknowable? It's a contradiction within the very argument itself. So that's like, it's just so absolutely stupid. It's just a conversation ender. This argument fundamentally goes nowhere. It can be used to justify anything, shoot down anything, and it's a presupposition that God exists, and it's truly unknowable, and it's just, no one follows through with the logical consequences. And they still claim to know certain attributes, actions of God, which is just the most explicit and unbelievably stupid special pleading. Is that some laughter I heard? That's fair enough. That's how I feel about this argument.
It's actually quite comedical that I'm joined at this time because I'm having really bad hiccups tonight, so that'll just be some extra comedy for you guys.
The hiccups usually go away pretty quickly, at least for me. All right, cool. Anyone have any qualms with my hatred of this argument of the God is unknowable argument?
Who argued this?
So someone playing devil's advocate, but he basically made the argument of, hey, you don't know God, and you don't know if he actually stops free will when he, like, logically makes determinism, because he's not bound by logic. Therefore, my argument is valid, and it's like, no, it's not. You've just basically thrown away every argument you can make about his nature by saying this. And it's stupid. And this is the only person who's made the argument to me. I've heard this argument before. I listened to way too many podcasts and talk shows. But I've heard this argument been made a lot, like God is unknowable, and it's the same general gist of God's plan or all these other things. It's just much more explicit. You take the smoke and mirrors out, and you're very explicit. Like, yeah, here's my arbitrary character is completely arbitrary, and you can't really talk about him in any way. And that's really what I believe. It's really what people seem to react, because people's position on God seems to really shift a lot if you don't peg them down with a very specific set of, like, yes or no's in terms of how they define God. Because otherwise, once you start introducing issues, their God just kind of shifts to fill the holes that you have not plugged, right? Which it's kind of a great segue into God of the gaps, honestly. But it is something that is used, whether explicitly as literally God is unknowable, or in some variant of one of the few we've covered, like God's nature, God's plan, that sort of stuff. It's just this air of mystery that's completely undeserved, and if it's truly mysterious, it really screws up any suppositions you might have, because you can't really have them if you can't know. It's like the most cartoony hiccups, man. Okay. So, the next two are some really common defenses for God's existence, external to the Bible, or philosophical arguments like I discussed before. And the reason we're talking about these, basically in the context of, we're not trying to talk about, God's existence or not. I mean, I do talk about that in the document, mostly related to anthropology and archaeology and stuff, and that's not just like, hey, I don't believe God exists for XYZ reasons. It's just like, hey, here's how this God developed, where he came from, that sort of stuff, and that's not really the point. The point is not, hey, this document exists because God doesn't exist. There's better resources for that. There's like, you could have a conversation with me, and I'd explain that, as to why I don't think he does. But these two are just two incredibly egregious arguments. And the issue with trying to analyze God as a character and analyze these texts, if someone just goes, yeah, God is real, and these texts are just kind of what happened, and his actions are perfect because he's perfect. Well, that's again, it's a conversation ender. What am I supposed to do with that? I can't talk to someone who's like, yeah, God's real because nonsensical reasons that you're not allowed to tackle, and because of that, I'm going to dismiss everything you say because I read in a book that he's perfect, and therefore him being evil demonstrably does not matter. It's just it's just nonsensical for me, and it's a conversation ender, and I need to get these out of the way. So we're going to talk about these. Number one, the God of the Gaps defense. Basically, this states that the existence of things that we do not fully understand proves God. So like a modern example, for example, is, hey, we don't know how the universe started per se, and therefore God did it. And, yeah, we don't know. There's theories, there's a bunch of them. Some people think the universe didn't even start, and it's just infinite, or there's a cycle, or whatever. And people just kind of shoved God anywhere they don't know how to do something. Like, for example, abiogenesis, the beginning of life and stuff. We don't know exactly how it happened. We know a good amount of it. The analogy I've heard is we know like all the steps before and all the steps after. We're missing one step in between, and therefore all the other steps we can just ignore, right? And it's just like, no, that's not how it works. So it's just used like X, Y, Z. We don't know yet, therefore God. And if you go back far enough, we don't know things like lightning, and that was also used for God. Like, hey, Zeus is throwing the lightning because people did not know where lightning came from. So this has been an ancient, not argument for God, but really God is used to resolve this argument. Instead of, we don't know how this works, therefore God, it's, oh shit, we don't know how this works, we need to explain how it happens, therefore God. Not using the lack of information to defend God, but using the lack of information to create God. That's how I view it, for the most part. But that's not really the argument. So the problem really with the God of the Gaps defense is it can be used to justify literally everything. Because, like, prove it's God. You don't know that, right? And it would just work in the same way. Like, oh, you think God made the universe? I think Joe the Space Universe created the universe. And that was not, in fact, the Abrahamic God. Prove me wrong. I'm just as wrong provable, or whatever, how you say that in actual English, as whoever would say it's God who's making the universe, right? And what is the fundamental difference? The fundamental difference is that people have preconceived notions, and Joe the Space Unicorn is not one of them. So, what fundamentally breaks down this argument is just kind of what I touched on earlier, is just because something's unknown, it isn't unexplainable. So, just like lightning, we didn't know how to explain it, but now we do. And then the philosophical issue with this, right, is if everything needs an explanation, and God can fill those explanations, then God must also need an explanation. And if God doesn't need an explanation, then neither does the universe or whatever God needs to be inserted into to explain. Logically, unless there's something special about God, at which point you must explain, quantify, and prove that. Any questions? Thoughts?
Well, why does every single defense against oh God is in fact real end up being also yet another contradiction? Is this just the curse of monotheism?
Well, it's not like a monotheism thing. It's just kind of theism thing, in my view. But what do you mean by a contradiction? I don't think God of the Gaps really contradicts anything, per se. I'm curious as to what you think.
I would say, well, because, you saying, Joe the Space Unicorn is just as provable or as unprovable as, I mean, yeah, I guess that's not a contradiction, but it's more
special
like
pleading.
a logical non-fallacy.
It is a fallacy. It's a special pleading fallacy. It's basically people are like, or you can argue there's two fallacies: special pleading, which, I mean, it's what it sounds like. You're pleading a case and you're giving it special consideration over other cases, right? It's pretty clear. So it's like, I don't know why this happened, therefore Yahweh did it, versus Joe the Space Unicorn or Zeus or whoever else. You choose Yahweh because that's who you believe in. That's who you have a preconceived notion to believe in, right? And that's special pleading. And then the either or fallacy is the other one I would say this fits, is basically it's either we can prove it or it's God, which is, again, it's a logical fallacy. So this is fallacious. It's not, I think you said hypocritical. I don't think it is. Maybe I'm wrong. But in the way I'm understanding it, I don't think so. That clear it up?
yeah. There's another point I want to mention, which I think is one of the my original kind of argument when I was talking with some people online about my views on Christianity without years before I read the Bible.
Yeah.
Um, is that why God is an issue of human bias. Why do we want this thing that creates
Hmm?
us as the most important life forms in a private race is us over
Yes.
anything else, and that's also just an attitude, a corrupt attitude we've had through almost all of human history and up until very recently. We are the center of the universe, like the geocentric model of the universe, that too,
I'd honestly
thinking
argue that geocentrism is just the what made more sense because it looks like the sun moves, not the Earth. So, but sure. Are you all right there?
anyway. No, I had a fucking stroke from what you just said. It's not correct. What are you talking?
I know
I'm
it's not
talking
correct, but if you go
about the
back a long,
universe,
long
the
time,
solar system.
I know. But if you go back many, many years, put yourself in the shoes of someone years
But
and
we
years and years
rotate.
ago. Huh?
Okay,
I know, I don't believe that the sun goes around the earth. I'm not insane. But, like, I'm saying, think of it from an anthropological view. You're thinking like a ethnocentric, and like the anthropological way, not like in the racism way, where you're thinking from like your
okay,
current perspective as in your current culture with your current understanding. Go back thousands of years. You're some shepherd, and like the
writing a shitty
newest
book.
big
Let's go.
invention is fucking iron, okay? And it's like, that's crazy, right?
Iron Age.
Yeah, if you're looking at the sky and you see a giant ball that moves around in a circle every single day, would you expect you're going around the big ball of fire, or do you think it's going around you?
If I
It's
would
just a
spend my entire fucking life studying it, I'd probably want to make a distinction, be
well,
absolutely sure
sure,
before I made
but
just lay down an opinion like a
sure,
fucking Greek
but
philosopher.
it's the simplest explanation for an observed phenomenon, and it doesn't
Yeah,
make
kind of.
sense at that point in time. Of course, it doesn't with our further observation, with all what we've looked into it. That's provably not the case, or as provable beyond the shadow of doubt, because solipsism is an unsolvable problem, so technically can't prove anything, but that's philosophical, right? But it's provable beyond the shadow of a reasonable doubt, let's say. Um, but no, I don't think, I do not believe in a geocentric model. No, I do not. But
Same,
you get
same.
what I'm getting at, right?
Yeah.
Okay. But yes, and in many ways I agree with you, and I even take it further. It's even more ethnocentric in the racist way, not the anthropological way. Many religions have a chosen people. Like, hey, this one does, and I don't know how far you've gone in the document, but later on we're going to talk about how a lot of the creation myths, one of the major themes is how XYZ people are bad and they deserve to be enslaved, and these people are good and God likes them and they deserve to do things, and they're divine, and all the bad things they do to other people are divinely mandated punishments and these sort of things. And it's built on excusing behavior and giving you like a superiority view, and it's not even just human centric, it's race centric, it's people centric, right? And I would agree with that 100%.
Oh yeah. So circling back around to what I was actually going to say in relation to this argument specifically
Mm-hmm.
against it is that you can choose anything you want to prove or disprove. Sorry, anything you want to be a reason behind something that is neither provable nor disprovable.
Yeah, unfalsifiable.
So why would you choose something? It's just part of your human bias that you're choosing something that is accepted for thousands of years as
Yeah,
happened to be a
confirmation
godly figure
bias.
around the globe, right? Yeah, yeah, exactly, confirmation bias.
Yes. And that's
Okay.
why the same argument is used by people of every single religion. It's
Yep, it's like, oh, well, my God did this thing. It is provable or disprovable, not disprovable or provable. Oh, well, my God did this. Like, if you have two people fighting over something, saying their God did it, and the fact itself is like not disprovable or provable, then I mean that tells you what you need to know, right?
okay, cool. Yeah. Any further thoughts, or are we good to move on? I'll take that as good to move on. Um, okay, thank you. Uh, so next up, you can't disprove God. I hear this one a lot. I've heard this one in my day-to-day life many times. I heard it literally within a week. Right? It's a very common one. And basically, what this argument basically says is it's either basically that since God can't be disproved, he must exist, Or if you're being more conservative, that belief in God is just as viable, just as logical as withholding belief or a lack of belief, right? Um, but it's really begging the question because people basically think from in my experience when people are saying this, they have the starting point of God is real. And they believe that God must be disproved, not that God must be proved, because God is just so fundamentally just everywhere, and people are just indoctrinated with this belief, and they believe, hey, this is base belief, this is base state, and I must be convinced to believe it. Really, you should be convinced to arrive at it. But that's not how people think. That's why I think this is so common, is it's just people are begging the question with their belief. In reality, burden of proof falls on the one making the claim, and despite the claim of God, like I said, being incredibly old and ridiculously prevalent, it's still just a claim. I could just as easily use this to, defend Nessie, the Loch Ness Monster's existence, since you definitely can't prove if it does or doesn't exist. Same with, literally anything else that's not really falsifiable. Right? And the classic example, of course, is a teapot. Specifically, Russell's teapot. And basically the idea with Russell's teapot is there's a teapot, it's a porcelain teapot, and it's orbiting the Earth, orbiting the Sun, between the orbits of Earth and Mars. And it's just going around there. And the idea is basically, would you believe in this teapot? Because you have no evidence against the teapot. And some more information, this teapot is completely undetectable to all devices. You cannot ever detect the teapot. It's just part of the definition of the teapot. Do you believe in the teapot? I don't think so, right? That's the whole point of this, is no one would reasonably believe in the teapot. And so, funnily enough, when I was grabbing the link to, hyperlink the Brussels teapot page, which I would recommend, it's a really fun experiment. I'd recommend reading it. Bertrand Russell's, I think, my favorite philosopher, honestly. Screw Plato. Yeah, his name was literally his wrestling name, but, and he would beat people up if they... Well, he threatened people with, being beat up if they didn't agree with him, but, still, Bertrand Russell was cooler. So, when I was looking for that link, I found this paper, which is, something like a 12-paper, essay thingy about someone saying why the teapot argument doesn't really work. And I'm like, oh, the teapot argument doesn't work? I thought that was great. And off the top of my head, plus, reading my text here, because I don't remember this super well, because it was, months ago at this point, it was a decent, argument against it, and it was basically saying that, hey, the teapot is arbitrary. And that was the main thing, is we don't disbelieve in the teapot floating around between Earth and Mars, not because we don't have evidence to prove that the teapot is there, but more because there's evidence that there isn't there. There's no direct evidence saying, hey, there's no teapot, but there is evidence, there's circumstantial evidence, hey, how did the teapot get there? Why is there a teapot there? People make teapots, no one's ever launched a teapot there, and how would a teapot, get there? Right, and these are evidence against it. And, for example, the author uses the example of what if there's an oblong rock in that same area of space with two craters, right? We'd be much more inclined to believe that that rock probably exists, despite not really having any evidence for that specific rock's existence. However, the claim that we don't have any evidence for that oblong rock is wrong. We know that there's so many countless rocks in space. And we also note that they vary in shape, and they have, craters and stuff. And with a bit of probability, we can say, yeah, presumably, it's likely that some series of parameters kind of worked themselves into place by coincidence that rock, or a rock fitting that description, probably exists. Right? The problem here, really, is God is really arbitrary, regardless of really the intentionally vague characterizations a lot of people attach to him. The author in this paper claims that God is not arbitrary, seeing as his attributes cannot be easily swapped out, as one could replace the teapot with a coffee mug or something. This isn't true, as I could replace God's all-loving nature with, for instance, an all-sadistic nature. The actions God is said to have done, the characters in the Bible, even God's name, Among many others, the claim that God impregnated multiple virgins and made them have magic babies, like Jesus, or previous to him, Samson. Yeah, Judges 13, if you don't believe me, and maybe others. I haven't, read everything in depth yet. It's fairly arbitrary, I would say, and I could keep going, but then we, have a lot more pages of preface, and it's not super on topic. Anyways, another argument against teapot is like there's no feasible way a man-made teapot could get to, the place between Earth and Mars. But if a theist is making this argument, it's a bit goofy since they believe in a god who's completely unknowable and has a nebulous plan. So why can't we just say God put the teapot there because he just feels like it, or he just does it because he's unknowable and he's all powerful and stuff, right? Which is just funny for me. Okay, cool. There's you can't disprove God, and if someone wants to check that paper, see if I screw up because I wrote this so long ago, but I'm pretty sure I'm accurately representing it from what I remember. Cool. Anyone have any thoughts? Questions? Statements? No. Is anyone there? Let me rephrase.
I think I'm starting to believe that there is a teapot.
Starting to believe there is a teapot. Why?
Because how would I know there's not one?
Okay,
God damn it, he just explained that.
Okay, go, read Bertrand Russell's whole dissertation on the topic. I guess the teapot's really just an example, to be honest with you, so... He doesn't really talk about the teapot. He kind of presumes it's simple enough for people to get the idea, yeah, there's obviously no reason to believe there's a teapot there. So yeah, you can't disprove it, right? And if we're talking philosophy, you can't disprove literally anything, just like you can't prove anything, but disproving is harder. Like because solipsism is something that exists. Like, hey, how do we trust our senses? How do we trust literally anything? How do we know logic is real? All that fun stuff. And the answer is you don't. You just kind of have to presume it, right? And
if logic can't be proven.
No, it can't.
Hold on.
You can't prove logic. What are you going to prove it with logic? It's not going to work.
So if we can't prove logic, then how can we use that unproven logic to say that God isn't real?
Well,
you knew where I was going with that, didn't you?
I do. Yes, that's a classic question. Well, basically, if logic does not work, I think God is the least of your worries. I think you should worry about, thinking, although I'm using logic to say that, right? Fundamentally, we can't, I don't know if you can, maybe, I would be crazy, I can't conceive of not having logic. I can't conceive of that, right? I don't,
because I've seen people
people
not use it.
Sure, but there's still some basic logic. Like, these people also know how, they have certain logical things they follow. Like, they know, for example, hey, I'm not going to just start floating randomly, because they know how, pattern recognition works, right? And that's just a form of logic. Logic informs basically every single conscious action we do. If there is no logic, well, there's no point pondering that, really, because if there's no logic, what now? We can't. And again, there's no reason to believe that logic is flawed, because the most simple explanation for logic is, yeah, logic is accurate, because when we do things, when we follow through logical... brain's farting on me. When we follow through with, our logical plans, things generally kind of go based off of, how one would logically assume they would. Right? And if logic was completely flawed, we probably wouldn't see these patterns. Of course, if you're a solipsicist, you could say, yeah, how do you know your brain's not just making that up? And there's no other people, and you don't even have a brain. You're just some random nebulous mind, and you're just kind of coming up with things and imagining things and doing all this other stuff. And yeah, I can't prove it's not happening, but there's no reason for me to believe that's happening. I feel like the assumption, the presumption, hey, our senses are accurate enough where we get some detail of some real world that probably exists, even with some warps, even with some maybe alterations to what philosophers call the noumenal world, the true world. I feel like that's a safe enough assumption, and of course the assumption that logic works. I think those two assumptions are fair enough, because you have to make some assumption. Otherwise, you're trapped in solipsism. There's no real way to get out of solipsism without making those two assumptions, or even just the assumption logic is a rule, and then you're in a softer form of solipsism, but it's still solipsism. So, that's how I view it. Some people will go, hey, if you can just suppose that, logic exists, you can also just suppose God exists, but at that point you're making more suppositions, and suppositions are not a good thing. You shouldn't just presuppose a bunch of things and like, yeah, I suppose it's true, therefore it is. When it comes to escaping solipsism, it's a bit different, because you're trying to get out of the state where you literally cannot consider anything as true or real or believable, which is just, you can't do anything with solipsism, whereas you can do things without God. There's no reason to presume God, whereas presuming logic is just so necessary and not much of a stretch, like to say that, hey, there's no logic, versus, yeah, I'm using logic right now, right? What am I using if not logic? I feel like it just makes logic the most, well, frankly, logical way of thinking about it. So, if you guys get what I'm saying and why I don't
Yeah.
believe you can use the same logic to prove God as you can to escape solipsism.
I do get that. I see logic a bit differently personally. I do see. I don't know what you called the real world there. Can you say it
The
again?
noumenal world. It's fucking Latin or something. Let's see if I can. I don't know how to even spell like noumenal world. Like it'll. That's how you spell, because Latin's stupid. Yeah, Immanuel Kant. And Kant had some things I disagree with, but he does have some cool things, which are like a priori concepts, which is basically those things that are like fogging our vision, and making us see the world in a way we're predisposed to, possibly hiding some things, but also giving us the tools to interpret the world. Like the classic example of one of those, and we're going off topic into philosophy. We'll get back to Genesis. It's big text, but we'll finish this up. But one of the classic examples of a priori concepts is the concept of space. A baby's born and they understand that things exist. They understand that they can move around. They have like they're feeling, they're experimenting. They don't need to learn how space works. They don't need to learn how these things work. It's implicit, right? How can you explain space to someone who does not know space? It's a completely unexplainable concept without the concept of space. I think, anyways. And so we just know space, and it's an a priori concept. We exist in a material spatial world, or at least we can only interpret it. We can only be part and feel that material spatial world. So you could say, yeah, it allows us to interact with the world, but you could also say, yeah, it may be hiding more of the world and forcing us to only interact with some of it. And I can't really say necessarily if it's true or not. I can't say, yeah, there's more. I can't know. I'm limited. But I don't think there's a point saying, yeah, there might be more. Great, what can I do with it? I'm limited by these concepts that I'm completely bounded within, so I'm only going to look at those concepts I am, unless I can find evidence for something else. Cool.
Yeah,
Alright, well, that was a philosophy dump, and I stumbled over my words many times, so yeah. There are
it's okay.
good philosophy
You did
people.
good, Goog.
Uh, there's better philosophy people than me, but like I have a good, moderately decent grasp. Okay, cool. Genesis. We're only on page just about 9 now. It's time for Genesis. Okay, who's excited for Genesis?
Whoa! Let's get killed.
Yippee.
Okay, this does.
Let's see our predecessors die over and over and over again.
Exactly.
Yes!
You just hit the nail on the head.
Incest.
Oh yeah, that happens too. We haven't gone on any explicit incest yet. That's gonna happen either in Genesis 19 or 20, which I have not written in my section on that yet, because that's when Job's daughters make, kind of roofie their dad and make him sleep with them.
Wouldn't Adam and Eve kind of be incest?
Yeah, you could argue because Eve came from Adam's rib bone. They're like direct clones and
Actually,
share the
it's
same
both
DNA. You could say it, but you could also say God just gave him different genetic makeup for sure. Adam and Eve's children are doing a lot of incest, and if you look at it, it's not mentioned in the Bible, but extra biblical sources kind of name Adam and Eve's daughters, because of course daughters are not named, because this text is incredibly patriarchal and sexist. Like, that's not an arguable point. I guess you can argue it, but you just kind of die in a conceptual way, of course. But incest is necessitated. It's not explicitly said that incest happens. It's just literally necessary for things to work. Because of how much God just like tries to murder the gene pool, and he does this within here, in the way he creates it, God screws up the gene pool, then he cuts the gene pool in half with Cain and Abel, then he cuts the gene pool into, like, a few people with the flood, and then he cuts the gene pool by sending everyone out on their own after the Tower of Babel. God really likes incest. It's just If he doesn't, why does he keep doing this? It's that's like part of the characterization is God either does not care about incest or he's just like a fan. Because how many times he forces it to happen. But we haven't actually gone to explicit, yeah, here's these family members, here's their relationship, they are doing sex. We have not done that. That'll happen in a part that I have not written yet. Anyways, Genesis 1, first creation. And this is really the oldest part of the document in terms of when it was written. Like, you can actually see the way I talk about, like, the way a screenshot is radically different. Like, I take these big bulk screenshots and we go, like, down, and I take these tiny little screenshots because the way I approach it was really different. I also have these giant blocks, and I also have giant blocks later on, but that's just because I am, like, unleashing my inner English major that I did not know I had. Okay. So, to start off with, we have the creation myth, which is so preposterous that I was even taught at a religious school, which I was at as a child, that it was basically supposed to not be taken seriously. It's just like a fun story or it's a metaphor. And at this point, really only the most devoted, Bible literalists would even try to claim this as direct truth. So, if you want an example, fucking Ken Ham, Young Earth creationism, it's really goofy. But if you look into the past, these ideas of, like, Genesis is accurate was a widespread belief, and you had people being arrested, killed by the church for like saying or doing anything that could contradict this, and like famously, Newton for you know going against the concept of the geocentric model. I think it was Newton. No, it was Galileo. Galileo. I don't know my my Renaissance history too well, but Galileo was famously put under house arrest because he contradicted what the church believed, right? And you also had Bruno. I forget his first name, but Bruno, who was burnt alive as a heretic for what he was saying. And the church has a long history of suppressing science, and in order to maintain their beliefs. And one of those was Genesis, and Genesis 1, and the rest of, depending on which church which
To add
church
on
you're
to
talking about.
that,
Yep.
I'm pretty sure it was illegal in the U.S. for a little while, like back early U.S., to actually teach evolution theory.
Um, I know it was only like started to really get mandated in like the 70s and stuff, and I think even then, like, part of the Bible Belt, like the Midwestern states, they'll still teach evolution as quote unquote a theory, and they'll put like little notes like, hey, this is a theory. Um, and they don't say, like, and they don't explain what a scientific theory is. They teach it like a theory, like, hey, my sock is missing. I have a theory. It went in the washroom and vanished somehow. Right? They don't teach what it means to be a scientific theory, and they just like, yeah, people think this, but it's not necessarily true, which is ridiculous. Like, that's still happening in modern times. As for illegal, I don't know about that, but I have a nifty thing called Google.
It used to be. It's not anymore, but like in early America.
Oh yeah, of course, formerly illegal to teach evolution in USA. Cool, let's see.
Oh god, you had to look up Temple OS. You didn't know what it was. That's unfortunate.
Yeah. Yeah, I was talked about last live Bible links yesterday. Yeah, human evolution in Tennessee. That sounds about right. That's fun.
Yeah, it was like a whole court case.
It's just amazing.
God, as late as I thought you meant like the fucking 18th century. That was fucking 1925. What?
No. It's Tennessee though. Tennessee even now still has issues teaching it. Like,
Yeah. Okay.
when did Tennessee? I can spell. What doesn't matter. Start teaching evolution. You see, Google knows. 1967 was when it was repealed, and even then, there's examples now, and I don't have any on hand, sadly. I could try to pull some up later if you guys want, where basically people will still do that. They'll teach them side by side as two competing ideas, and then the teachers themselves are creationists, and it's like, yeah, which one are the students going to get out of it? Especially when they have religious indoctrination plus a teacher who doesn't believe what they're teaching. It's like, no shit, people are not going to believe evolution. And then here's just like more detail about like creation versus evolution. If you guys want it, Wikipedia's. I remember this article was good. I don't remember much about the article. I don't remember what I know from the article versus other things. It was a while ago, but I do remember this was a cool article. Okay. So, I've heard a lot of people try to abstract away the concept of like days within the evolutionary framework. Not the evolutionary framework, the creation framework. My bad, my brain's a bit fried. And basically have a day be some large period of time. And, first of all, there's no reason that I can see to believe that. Especially with, like, there's no evidence, like, yeah, day's a bunch of time. It's like, no, these are described as days, and they mirror the week. Like, this seems to be a pretty robust day-by-day thing, instead of, like, years. Whatever. And it's like, they say it's, like, poetic, but then why is the Sabbath a day of rest? Because, like, God rested on the 7th, and so you should too. Why is that the case if it's years? So I don't like that. It just doesn't make sense to me. It's massive periods of time, and that's just an attempt to be like, yeah, no, the creation narrative was actually talking about like evolution and stuff, and it's like, okay, yeah, sure about that, buddy. But even then, the order that these events take place is just wrong. It's not even that their time frames, like how long it takes for these things to happen, is wrong, but it's just like the order things happen, and just the things that happen are just flatly incorrect. Let's run through it. Now, so in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the Spirit... I can't read, sorry. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. And God said, "Let there be a vault between the waters to separate water from water." So God made the vaults and separated water under the vault from the sky above it, from the water above it, and it was so. God called the vault sky, and there was evening, and there was morning, the second day. So, before I jump into what I wrote here, let me talk about something cool I was hearing recently. Listen to this German professor, talk on a podcast. I forget what his first name was, but his last name was Grabe. And I bought his book, because it was really cool. But he was basically talking with the host of the podcast, and we're talking about like how myths come into be, and how a lot of narratives have this concept of water, and this is like from Mesopotamians. And there's basically this idea of like this feminine, like god who's like very water-based, goddess, not god, whatever. And she's defeated by different god figures across different areas to like make the world. I have it linked in my like Bible notes, which I do have. I have a notes document of stuff I want to talk about, but aren't like. No, I want Bible notes. Come on, Bible notes. There we go. It is specifically this video. I don't remember if I wrote it down. I don't think I wrote it down. That's sad. But I have this one. This is a really great video. I'll link it in like chat, actually. How do I copy for 1 second? I'm a genius. I can put it inside of... There's a chat on the thingy. I swear I know how like technology works. There it is. Okay, cool. And this is a good video. Anyways, back to the polished Bible activity. And that's kind of paralleled here because, I mean, as you can see, God's hovering over the waters before he's done anything. There's water already. There's this deep void of water, and God forms things out of it. And, think about, like, the concept of the sky as, like, water, because that's, like, not super uncommon. Like, why would people believe that the sky is water? Well, it's blue. The ocean's blue as well. And also, occasionally the sky leaks. Some of the water comes down as rain. And so it felt alien to me when I was first reading this. Like, why the fuck is it water? Like, it's because it's blue? And it's like, there's more to it. The rain's, like, the sky is leaking. There's a crack in the vault. The water's coming down. Right? And that's really cool to me, at least. Time to, like, tear it apart. So, firstly, God creates the heavens and the earth. But what exactly are the heavens? They can't be the sky or the atmosphere, as God makes that out of the ocean in the third paragraph. Perhaps the night sky, perhaps space. Let's view this as charitably as possible and say space. So then, the first thing God does is to make space, the universe, Earth, And Earth is also covered in water from the start, as I said, inexplicably, really. Well, unless we're talking about the idea of, like, hey, water God is being ripped apart. But ignoring that, from a scientific standpoint, inexplicably. The universe is 13.7 billion years old, while the Earth is merely 4.543 billion years old. Only after the Earth does God make day and night, e.g., the sun, and people disagree with this, but then I explained, and they're like, nope, no, you're right, so I don't know anyone who disagrees that God is making the sun here. Some people probably do disagree, but no one I know. But yet the sun is 4.6 billion years old, which, tiny bit older than the Earth on a cosmic scale, and a bit more than a tiny bit if we're talking about, like, half a billion years, solid amount of time. Furthermore, the Earth was formed from the dust and gas left over from the sun, so, hey, if the Earth is coming about before the sun, what dust is it coming from? And for the first 100-odd million years after formation, it was under a constant barrage by large quantities of asteroids, some of which were what actually likely brought water to the planet. It wasn't already here. And at one point, Earth even collides with another planet, which leads to the formation of the Moon. From what I remember, it's like a Mars-sized planet, smashes into each other, really big collision, a bunch of debris comes out, and the gravity kind of pushes them together into the Moon. And so the order and also, like, the mechanics necessarily are just utterly wrong from what we know actually happened. Right? It's just flatly wrong. And then God makes the sky out of the pre-existing globe-spanning ocean, which just exists. Besides that, the sky being made of water is flatly preposterous. And, like, here, like I was saying before, they're both big, they're both blue, and I didn't add the part about the leaking in the rain because that's something that occurred to me after I wrote this. In fact, this is so backward that at Earth's onset, all the water would be housed in the atmosphere as in a vaporous form, and the only oceans would be those of magma. So it's literally backwards in terms of where the water would be, not as some great globe-spanning deep ocean. Any thoughts, I guess? I'll just do, like, every paragraph, and you guys, of course, can butt in and if you guys have ideas, but I'll just, like, check for ideas, thoughts, and stuff. Anyone have any?
Are you gonna mention heat theorem at some point?
Which one?
Heat theorem.
Heat theorem. I know about the heat problem when it comes to...
the heat problem. That's what I meant.
I will get to that when we get to the flood, because there's nothing about, like, age of the Earth at this point. There's just, like, it's just wrong. And when it comes to the heat problem, that's generally something that's usually related to the flood, because people try to shove a bunch of stuff in the flood, and I think it's more relevant. I'm also not super well versed on the heat problem. Like, I know the general idea, but I couldn't do it justice without, like, a bit of pre-planning, and I did not do that, to be completely honest with you. Right now, I don't have a science background, which is unfortunate. I'm trying to get one right now, but it's not something I'm great at, unfortunately.
Bro literally has fucking, like, programmed computers in his garage for like 2 or 3 years now, and he can't, quote unquote, doesn't have a science background. My fucking ass, man.
I don't know about
You were taking calculus when you were 12. By the way, yeah.
Doing what
You
when I
did
was
that, by
12?
the way.
Wait, what did I do?
Fucking doing calculus.
I was 13, and I also just kind of forgot how to after that point. Regardless, that's not really a geology thing. Being good at math as a child does not make you good at geology for some reason. I don't know how that doesn't work that way. Anyways, so with that out of the way, and God said, "Let the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and let dry ground appear." And it was so. God called the dry ground land, and gathered water he called seas. And God saw that it was good. So, this is vague enough that I can't really dispute the formation of the continents. However, what I do find interesting is that apparently God called the ground land and the water seas. That is what in fact it says. And I figured this could be something with the translation from the original text, so I pulled up a Hebrew version, and it's also claiming the same thing, and I can actually do that right now, because I can, like, highlight and stuff. So, this is Genesis 1. I don't remember how I forgot which chapter of Genesis is the beginning of Genesis. So if I pull up this beautiful website, where are we? What is it? Genesis 9? Oh, here it is. So, and imagine just like, yeah, my Hebrew knowledge, so I'm going to look at the translation. No. So, anyways. Okay. This word over here, kara, basically means to call, right? Hamaim, kara, yamaim. It's just the water. Just ha is just the in Hebrew. So maim is just water. Hamaim. Kara, yamim, which just means seas, right? And then it's just God says things are good. Oh, right, he says land first. And Elohim, and then Elohim is just a Hebrew way to say God. Actually, while we're on the topic, I was going to leave this for the end of the chapter, but I realized since we're talking about the Hebrew anyways, let's actually talk about something cool. So, there's a few ways to say God in Hebrew. And we'll get to the origins of these in a while. Not a while, in like later this chapter. I think later this chapter. Or next chapter. I forget where I do it, but we'll get to that later. Talking about, the anthropology, the archaeology, like, talking about El, Asherah, all the Baal, all these other Canaanite deities. We'll get into that. We're not going to talk about that now. But if we're talking modern Hebrew, there's a few ways to say God. One of them is El. El is just the generic word for God. Oftentimes you'll put like El Elyon or El Shaddai, God the High One. El Elyon is basically the High, and then Shaddai is like the Almighty, so God Almighty or God the High. And then there's also like Baal, which is another god, and he's used as like a general way to say God far less. He's not the way people generally say now, but he does. The names just show up in the Bible, and it is used to refer as like a general like God term. It also comes from an ancient Canaanite deity, and there's evidence that certain things from that deity were plagiarized onto the Hebrew god Yahweh, he's also not a Hebrew god. He comes from the Midianites when they immigrated into the land of the Israelites. That's what the archaeological evidence says. Anyways, where was I? Right. So interesting thing with Genesis chapter 1, or since we're in Hebrew mode, Parashat Breshit. The name Yahweh, or if we look in the Hebrew, if I go to the next chapter, is actually not Yahweh. The way you get Yahweh is you just take the consonants, the English consonants you'd get, and you smush them together, and just kind of that's the easiest sound you can make. But the Hebrew actually does have consonants, and here it is. Here it is Yevah, but it actually will shift over. There's a little dot that goes after here, after this letter here, the het, which makes an H sound. So this is Yevah, which just sounds similar to Yahweh, but it's similar. It's very different. Like that this is a vet. It has a ves sound. It can make other sounds in other situations. But if I actually jump, let's see. Okay, I don't see it here, but there's certain ways where there'll be a little, we'll call it chubchik, just like a little dot after the head. I don't remember where I saw it last, but it does show up sometimes, and that makes instead of Yevah, it makes it Yehovah, which makes people saying Yehovah make more sense in terms of as the name of God. This is a bit off topic, but it's just interesting to me. But what I was getting at before I went on that tangent is Genesis chapter 1 has nothing when it comes to the name Yevah, Yahweh, whatever you want to call it. That is not what I thought I copied. If I copy that, we can see, boom, there it is, a bunch of times. There's his name, right? Here it's Yahweh Elohim, Yahweh Elohim, and Elohim is a plural way to say gods, and they're the pantheon of that god El I was talking about earlier. But it's also just a way to refer to a singular god, just say he's so great, there's like a bunch of them. So just that's also coming from El as a base. But if we go back to Genesis 1, right? If I put this here, no Yahweh, only Elohim. And I found this interesting when I was first reading this, and I came to realize later, like, hey, why does it seem... And if also you notice, Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, 3, to like a bunch of the other stuff, are written very differently. Genesis 1 is like, God did this, then he did this, then he did this, then he did this, and it's just very flatly, and like, it's a list, right? You know, God does this thing, and then God does this thing, and it's very boring. It's very matter of fact. And then if you look at like Genesis 2, 3, if we can get there, I don't know today, if we'll get there today or later. Let me know if I'm boring you guys. But if we get to Genesis 2, 3, I mean, not just his name, but also how it's written. It's more like a narrative, it's more like a story, it's more interesting, it's more poetic. And it's completely like a night and day. And there's a few other places where we can see this distinction where the name he's given and how the narrative is written changes. And so I'm like moderately recently found out basically why people think this is the case. And basically because, you know, something I like to say a lot is the Bible wasn't written, it was compiled. And that would have been during the Babylonian exile. And people are saying, you know, 10 BC to like 6, 7 BC is like the estimated period. But mainly, there wasn't like a singular source, and there's also a bunch of other things going on during that Babylonian exile. There's, you know, the transition, you know, to a monotheistic religion, or really a monolatristic religion, and I'll get to what those are later because I'm going on too much of a tangent. Is going on during that time. And so you're shifting from, you know, many, many gods in a pantheon to this one god. And, of course, the texts don't just magically change, and so they're modified. And there's still bits and pieces that show up, and I'll point them out when we get to them, of evidence just pointing to hey, used to be multiple gods here. But basically the idea that people have is multiple sources. And here, the two sources we're dealing with, Genesis 1, is from something called the priestly sources. Which, if I pull out like a Wikipedia for us, priestly sources. Oh, there, I have it actually. There. And this is basically thought to be the priestly tradition who was, you know, making that switch, going and redacting certain things and adding certain things. And they are what is, you know, their source for some things, and Genesis 1 is thought to be one of those. Right? And I think it just says somewhere here, if I look like Genesis. Yeah, here we go. Right. So, or not actually, whatever. But this is just like a general idea. And then the more poetic stuff comes from something called the Jahwist source, or the Yahwist source. The Jahwist is like the German way of saying it, but whatever. That's how I learned it first, so that's why I memorize it. No, I don't Britannica. I like Wikipedia. I know the layout better. And this one actually talks about cool things, and we can see, you know, it's named Yahwist because it's the source. It's the source that uses the name Yahweh, or you know, Yahweh, or if you're German. And we can see that chapter to chapter. So, and we can see, you know, here's Genesis 2, 3. It's talking about that, and that's more story structure, and there's like more, and there's a bunch of hypotheses, and I have not put in the document yet because I'm not, you know, I'm not to a like happy degree comfortable with my knowledge on it. But this is something to note. Did I say that very confusingly, or is everyone like tracking with what I'm talking about?
Yeah, we're tracking. I would do have to go though because I have to like go to bed.
Okay.
But yeah. See you like whenever the next session is, probably literally tomorrow, right?
No. Yeah, I'm busy. It will be Sunday. If.
Oh, all right. Yeah. I'll attend Sunday session.
See ya. Cool. All right. Wow, it's too boring with my anthropology. I see how it is.
9 o'clock's a popular, like...
It's 8:51. Got 9 minutes. It's 9 to 9.
Close enough.
Alright, I guess we'll finish up for today with my unnecessary and boring dissertation into Bible sourcing. You know, okay, I get it. I see what people are saying. Okay.
Blasphemy. Bye.
Bye. You say bye, and I'm not gonna hit the end button accidentally again. You're not gonna trick me into doing that.
I'm trying to disconnect. Discord is weird. Goodbye. I think I found the button.
I disagree. Oh, okay,
Nah,
now I
if you
agree.
close out Discord, it won't hang up, which is wild. Because
Yeah.
that's how it is on mobile.
Yeah, it's very fun, yeah. Cool. So yeah, I think we're probably gonna stop here.
Okay.
And that is, yeah, we got one section of my, oh no, two section. Oh, gone to the
Yay.
beginning of the second section that I wrote in Genesis, so that's like progress. Cool. All right.
How much of calculus do you remember?
I don't even remember what's calculus and what isn't. Okay, like it's goofy.
Okay.
Yeah. If you're asking for like help, yeah, I don't think I would be a good source for that. It's because like it was a while ago. It was like 5 years now, so I don't remember. That's when I finished. So like Calc B. So I guess maybe when I was 12, I could have actually been doing Calc A.
That's wild.
I don't know. I don't remember. It was so long ago. But yeah.
That's actually wild.
Yeah, it's not. There's a lot of people who do similar. Let me turn the recording off. I don't need that on at this point. But no, I've